Alright, I've got it buckled back up. I've run it for a couple of minutes. I'm going to try a semi-warm start on it. Well, it runs pretty good. I've really been thinking about that oil situation, and it would have to be leaking very low since there was absolutely none in it. I think it maybe have leaked out over time, perhaps this plug or maybe this side cover. I did torque these bolts down. They were right on the money, 90 inch-pounds. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure where the oil went. Alright guys, well I'm back on the gearbox now. I'm going to address all these components one by one. I've already done one. This is the remainder of the bushing that was in this bore right here. I've already turned one out of this piece of Delrin to fit that. You can see what it should have been versus what it was. And I also went ahead and recreated this piece right here. So this will ride inside this. Go ahead and just get this installed real quick. So that's that. This will now freewheel on there like it's supposed to. These sprockets are quite worn. The chain is stretched as well. The worst one is right here. See where it's all garbled on the inside? Probably a third of its thickness is gone. I'm not replacing this, but I have another idea to take up this chain. I'll get to that in a moment. These are the two flange bearings I need to recreate. You can buy these for about $8 a pop. I believe they're nylon. The largest piece of Delrin I had was 1 1/8 inches, and I needed more like 1 3/8. So that wasn't going to work out for me. I did find this large chunk of UHMW, and I believe what I'm going to end up doing is slicing it right here. I'll turn them round beyond that. I should be able to get both of them out of this one piece. And then of course this is the oilite bearing or bushing that came out of it. And I've got my choice of the options here, which one I'm going to use. I believe the larger one. But if I make a mistake turning this OD down, I've got the other one to fall back on. As far as these shafts go, I just chucked them up in my lathe, hit them with a file, and they're pitted quite bad, but they're relatively smooth. So we're just running with that. Alright, well I've got it mocked up here with my new bushings in place. This is all the slack I was referring to. Look how much slack is in that chain. That's unacceptable. When I was playing around with it earlier, this could have a potential to try to walk up here and it would bind up and the machine would lock. So the way I think I'm going to remedy that, it's always turning in the same direction. So the input shaft turns here and all of this slack gets taken up and goes under tension on this side. This is where all the slack is. So I believe what I'm going to do is use a piece of Delrin in here just like that and take up that remaining bit of slack, and it will just ride across the bottom. It's not necessarily a tensioner. It's not going to have tension put on it, so it'll take a long time for that Delrin to wear through to the point where that problem creates itself again. Alright guys, well here's another mock-up with that new flange bearing installed in here. Again, like I'd said, you can see how much slack I have in this chain, and now I have this one mocked up. You can see what we're dealing with there. I found a couple pieces of Delrin in my scrap bin, so I'll turn these down to the appropriate diameter. I'm thinking one is going to go about here, a little too large, and then the other one around here to keep this slack out of this. Alright, we're working on the other half now. Here's the other bushing. I'll get this pushed down in there. That's looking good. I've turned this down to the proper diameter. It's looking good. I'll get this started. Now I'll drive it home. Alright, well I drove that bushing home and put the plug in the end here. I've got all its internals in now. This shaft, much better than what it was. A little bit of play around the inner bearing race, no big deal. This shaft here, man, check that out. Nice and snug. Looks like it's going to work to me. I'm at the point where I need to work out those two pieces of Delrin to take up the slack in the chain. Alright guys, well I found something else I didn't like. You see all this play right here? This whole shaft is free to move in and out. More than likely when the belt's turning it would self-align itself, but with that chain being so loose it was kind of giving me some fits wanting to bind up. So the spacer that's in here is just a little split ring like this, but it's 3/8 in length. It's not worn. That's exactly what it's supposed to be. So I made a new one and I measured it wrong. All that work, and I had to create another one. There's a little chamfer up here that sits down in this recess. So I'll show you what I'm dealing with now. Just use this bolt temporarily. Much better. And that does fall in line to center that chain. Well, alright guys, I've made progress. I'm going to describe what I've done and what I'm doing. I started by piercing the two holes in this side of the case. And the only fasteners that I had that are long enough are these two lengths of carriage bolts. This one's way too long. I'm trying to get away with this one, but I'm anticipating using nylocks on the outside, and I'm not quite getting engagement into the nylock portion. I'm going to try to run the nuts backwards, and if that works out fine. If not, I'll modify the other length. Because it's carriage bolt, I needed a square hole right here. How did I do that? Well, here's how I did it. I measured the distance across the flats here on the carriage bolt, and that's the diameter of drill I used to pierce those holes. And then I took one of those, threaded it in, pushed it in, and then took the old spacer with a washer and I hit it with my impact driver and formed that square hole right there. So now when you insert the carriage bolt, it'll lock in and not turn. I had to kind of do a dance on what diameter to get these. I'm going to call them idlers, okay, because they're not really tensioners. There's a little bit of play still left in these shafts, and it was hard to find the right diameter. So once I transferred and pierced the holes on the other side, I started putting it together without this one in there until I got this one turned down just enough to where it was not binding or anything. And then I took it out and switched over to this one and then put them both back in and kind of danced back and forth, because all of these things have a little bit of play and it's affecting how much tension is put on that chain. The next thing I've done was created the gasket. They wanted, I don't know, 25 bucks for this. 15-20 minutes of my time, there you go. I'm at the stage now where I need to put everything together, and I'm going to do it dry but with the gasket because that's going to affect spacing. Do a final mock-up, make sure everything's good, then I'll take it back apart, lube everything up, get it nasty, put it back together, and we'll move on. Alright, well I've done a dry mock-up. I was able to run these nylocks backwards so I don't have to make longer bolts. That's always a good thing. All said and done, this is the amount of play I have in it now, which is nice. Noisy, but nice and free. It's lube up time. I've got to drive the roll pin back in here, get the seals and dust caps on, and we're at assembly. Alright, well I've got it buckled up, packed with this Valvoline fully synthetic extreme pressure grease there. I did use gasket shellac on the gasket. I don't want anything getting in or getting out for that matter. It's nice and smooth. Feels great. Alright guys, well I packed some grease down in here and installed the seals. They were originally riding way out here. I think they walked out over time because there was so much play in this shaft. Got them where they belong. I was turning my attention to the dust caps. I knew one of them was broken, but it won't fit anyway. There's a little ridge in here that's supposed to snap into this groove, and there was so much rust and what on here. After I've cleaned it up, it's just super loose now. You can get new ones, but I don't think they would be any better because of the problems here and here. And this one, it's missing it altogether, so there's nothing that would hold that on. I thought I was finished making parts, but I was wrong. I made 2 modified custom bushings to go on it, dust caps, that will go on here, and I made it a drive-on fit, and it'll drive all the way to this weld seam like that. I also made them a little bit longer. You can see that. That is to take up most of the gap between the tine and the end of the dust cap, hopefully to help prevent stuff from getting in there as well. I'm getting ready to install these. I'm going to pack a little bit of grease down in here, drive them on, and then we're coming down the home stretch. Okay, well I've driven on my custom dust caps. They're not going anywhere. The tines, I'm just going to bolt them on. I was missing one of those pins and the hairpin that goes in it. They'll be put on last. I'm just mocking it up here to make sure everything's still looking good. Yeah, I left myself about 1/8 of an inch down on each side because this shaft has a little bit of side-to-side play on it, and I don't want these tines contacting these dust caps. Alright, well I've got the gearbox mounted back to the handle. There's just 4 bolts in here. Tighten them up, no big deal. I can tell this is not going to stand up without the tines on it. I don't know what I was thinking. This is the one where I broke that bolt right there. I was actually able to get a hold of it from the backside with some vice grips, work it back and forth, and got it out of there without having to drill and tap. Put a new one in, no problem. I'm going to put a light film of grease on this shaft to help prevent any further rusting and these tines from binding in the future. Alright, we got the tines locked down. This plate goes right here. I did a little bit of straightening on it. And the engine will bolt to that plate. So I'll get all these bolts installed and tightened up, and we'll see what's next. Alright, well I need to get this throttle cable installed and adjusted. I'm going to start with it on low throttle to give myself more cable to get this in the linkage right there, and now I'll shift it into full throttle, get it hooked up in here. Just get it close. Still on full throttle. Now I'll pull it back until I get full throttle out of the engine, and that is the point where I tighten this cable down right here. Check it. Looks like it's going all the way down. Full throttle. Looks good. Might as well stick the air cleaner on it while I'm at it. Haven't replaced it yet. All that's at the very last. Alright, well, I'm installing the belt guard temporarily. I am going to be using this shot belt just to ensure everything works before I purchase a new one. When putting this on, I'm going to be going under here with my fingers. I have to make sure that this belt rides on top of this idler right here, as well as below this pin. So I'll be fishing around in there. It's kind of difficult to get it on. You've got to start just right. Looks like I'm getting lucky. Start rotating it around. Got my fingers under there. I can feel that pin. I'm above everything. Well, that actually wasn't too bad. One nut for this stud. We've got this big one with a star washer on it that goes right here in the side of the engine block. There we go. We got this one that goes back to here, and there's a washer and nut on the back of it, and then this washer and bolt goes right under here into the side of this case. Alright guys, this is the last step right here. I've got an extra one of these pins for some reason. I put some cable ties to hold the cables in place. Unfortunately, it has rained. Store it like that so I can move it around. It has rained, but what do you say we take it outside the door and at least fire it up and see if it works? Alright, well hopefully there's still enough gas in it. I just want to fire it up and make sure everything seems alright. See what we got. Alright guys, well everything seems to work just fine. Sounded fine to me as well. I went down and picked up a new belt for it. I pulled the cover off to put on the new belt and the oil leak has finally presented itself. So let me get the engine pulled off of it and I'll show you what I found. Right here is where it was leaking, coming out of the gasket on this side cover, probably to about right here, this back corner. That would explain why there was no oil in it. It just leaked out over time. It was not run without oil. Let me get this cover off and I'll show you the inside. Alright, I've got it opened up and kind of wiped out. It had a little bit of blackish garbage in here. I put new oil in it, and when I drained it, it must have washed a bunch of the stuff out of here. I'll show you that in a moment. But since I've got it open, the connecting rod is nice and tight. It's not loose at all. The cylinder wall looks good as far as I can tell. The cam looks good. Everything looks good. Just addressing this leak around this gasket right here. Alright, here's a quick shot of the oil that came out of it, and probably about, I'll say collectively, maybe a half hour of use. It's not horrible by any stretch. I didn't really see anything metallic in there. There was no big globs of sludge or anything. But if I'm going this far for $4 or $5, I know I've washed it out of anything that might be in there. Just go with fresh and new. Well, to my surprise, I was able to find this gasket locally. More on that in a bit. While I was there, I picked up a new air filter, the pre-filter, and the grommet that I needed. Alright, well here's what I've discovered. This is not a one-size-fits-all gasket. They have different thicknesses available. they have a 5 thousandths, a 9 thousandths, and a 15 thousandths in thickness. That is what sets the crankshaft in play on these engines. This particular one requires between 2 and 8 thousandths. According to my indicator, I came in at 7 thousandths of in play. I did that before I took the cover off to see where I was at. This gasket here, the old one, comes right in at 13 thousandths, which tells me it cannot be a 9 and it cannot be a 5. It is a crushed 15, in my opinion. 2 thousandths has been taken away after it was torqued down. So that's the gasket I needed to pick up. And you can see I'm right at, saying 14, 16. There we go, 15 thousandths rough about. So this is a 15 thousandths gasket. This is the one I needed. I could not use, let's say, a 9,000 to take up and get to the tighter end of that 2 to 8 because it would put me below 2. I did the math on that, it just wouldn't work out. So there we are, 15 thousandths. Alright guys, well I got all these surfaces nice and clean. I was looking at the pattern of the bolts in here, and this one happens to be in a blind hole. This one, however, goes into where the valves ride through. Through hole, through hole, through hole, through hole. I'm going to go ahead and use this high temp thread sealant on the bolts when I put this together, especially this one right here, to ensure that nothing can leak out through the threads and maybe come through the back side. Alright, well I've got the cover installed with the new gasket torqued down to 90 inch-pounds. I'm going to check my end play here and see what we got. We should have between 2 and 8 thousandths. I have 6 thousandths now on the dial, so I've actually tightened it up by 1 thousandths with that new gasket. Not sure how that worked out. This one must not have crushed down as much as the other one was. But it's looking good. Alright guys, well I've buckled it up, got everything new installed on it. I've just been tilling right here. I'm doing a little bit of grading. I'm just using this to break up the soil so I can move it around easier. I'll let you hear it, see it working. Alright guys, well I've got it cleaned up. I used it for about an hour. It never missed a beat. It seems to run really nice, quiet. My modification seems to work just fine. No complaints at all. I believe, discounting the gasket material since I used so little of it, I've got right at $39 in parts and oil. Not too bad. Just some general information on something I did to get this old beast running again. Thanks for watching guys, and good luck.